Hey everyone, Pugs here with two new reviews for y'all. Today I'm covering Porous Pockets and Choir Boys. Oh Lord Almighty, please give me strength in these trying times. Because I've got the double whammy of a forgettable episode, which on its own means nothing, but, well, I know how I feel about this episode. So, anyway, I've got the double whammy of a forgettable episode and an extremely infamous one. Don't y'all just envy me? Well, anything else I could say right now might be better left for the part of the review where I do a deep dive into these episodes, so I'll go ahead and move on to the part where I say thank you to everyone watching today. I know this video had some delays in coming out, so I appreciate y'all's patience as I get used to a new year and a new semester. And with that, it's high time we just get right into it. Beginning our foray into difficult to review episodes is Porous Pockets. Now, y'all know me. Or maybe you don't. But one thing you should know either way is that I've got a pretty good memory for the episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants, if I do say so myself. I'm pointing this out because I need y'all to understand how serious it is when I say that Porous Pockets is forgettable. Now, it's not the most forgettable episode in the show. I can think of at least 3 others more forgettable than this one, but it is certainly up there. It's just unremarkable. And as a preview for what I'm about to get into, I find this episode unremarkable because it's not funny, and not many interesting things happen during its runtime. The beginning scene of Porous Pockets is actually a rather illuminating example of this. This scene starts with SpongeBob walking around Jellyfish Field during a relaxing stroll. In theory, there's nothing wrong with this. In execution, it's boring. And even once the screeching begins, I'm still feeling kinda meh about the whole thing. That is, until the screeching is falsely revealed to be Patrick. I say falsely because he's just mimicking the scream, as this part was a bit funny. And then the bit with the very unhealthy looking clam, the actual source of the screeching, is fine, I guess. I really have nothing to say about this. All of the coughing sounds here are just kind of in the background of this part of the scene, and I didn't really need to hear all that. I suggest keeping that little comment in mind for when I review Choir Boys in a few minutes. Wink wink. Anyway, the bit with the slime lick maneuver, great pun by the way, was actually pretty funny though, so this first part of the episode isn't all bad. But in general, this scene just feels lacking to me, which is a critique I can apply to the rest of the episode. As Porous Pockets progresses, I'm just struck by the feeling of wasted time. For example, the entire scene at the volleyball courts feels unnecessary, or at least wasted since it didn't entertain me. I don't mind quote-unquote filler in an episode as long as it amuses me, because then it's not really filler at that point since it's serving a purpose. But this scene is boring, and because it's boring, its unnecessariness to the plot becomes more obvious. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. But here's what I mean by the scene being unneeded. Why couldn't SpongeBob just realize what he was holding was a pearl right away and save us all some time? This setup just feels unnecessary because all the plot needed was SpongeBob somehow selling the pearl. That's literally it. That could have happened while SpongeBob and Patrick were still in Jellyfish Fields. We didn't need to see SpongeBob in his underwear on a volleyball court with a severe lack of humor at play. Once this episode reaches its 5-minute mark, or just around there at least, I realize what the biggest problem of Porous Pockets is, and that is the plot. I guess everything I ranted about 30 seconds ago makes it clear that this is my big issue, but now it's even more clear to me because the plot here just ain't good. SpongeBob's not a character that has ever cared about money or buying things. That's one of the reasons why he has the dynamic he does with Mr. Krabs. Hell, that's one of the reasons why Mr. Krabs as a character exists, because he is the guy who cares about all that, not SpongeBob. And listen, I get that the point of the plot here is to make SpongeBob fall into this mindset, but I just think that's a step too far in playing around with his character, since this plot is kind of antithetical to his entire character, and it feels wrong in a way that goes beyond what the episode intended. And yes, it is intentional that SpongeBob being like this is wrong, that is why the episode makes SpongeBob act like a pompous jerk. But intention doesn't make me like the plot any better, because I don't like the whole idea of the plot in the first place. I mean, for one thing, this episode still has yet to make its plot palatable to me. Sure, okay, you want to make SpongeBob act like this, then at least make it interesting and entertaining. Porous Pockets fails in this regard. It relies entirely on the audience knowing that SpongeBob is acting so fundamentally different to his true self, but that does not automatically make the episode good. It just leaves us confused and annoyed, or at least that's how I feel. And now that I'm thinking about it, this episode, in a way, is like Patty Hype gone wrong. Patty Hype had a different main topic, but it did have a moment with SpongeBob being in possession of a ton of money. And you know what he did with it? He gave it away, because he was a foil to Mr. Krabs in that episode. He didn't buy a bunch of shit, he didn't start to become snobbish, he just got rid of it. That's how you make a plot like this palatable and in character. Porous Pockets does actually start out by doing this, at least kind of, since this is after SpongeBob does all the buying shit that I already critiqued, but then it eventually fails. And Porous Pockets fails because it lacks humor and it's just completely out of character, as I've repeatedly stated. The montage of SpongeBob and Patrick buying things at the mall is visually interesting at best and very boring at worst. The part with SpongeBob and the ice cream is fine, but it feels more like it's just moving the story along rather than trying to be entertaining. And then SpongeBob leaving Patrick in the dust is so woefully out of character, and it's just another example of the problem I've been having with the writing between Patrick and SpongeBob lately. I really don't understand what the appeal is in having these two be terrible friends to each other. It's not good or entertaining, not to me anyway. Also, in this episode, it's really abrupt, and it makes the change entirely too jarring, and therefore, it's not even an attempt for justification made here for SpongeBob's behavior, so things continue to be unpleasant and out of character. Honestly, as a side note, I think that Porous Pockets would have worked far better if it was Patrick in SpongeBob's place, as episodes like Rule of Dumb demonstrate that Patrick can have this snobbish streak and still be likable. At least to me, since I know that Rule of Dumb is, not an incredibly liked episode. Goodbye Krabby Patty also did something like this, episode did, but Patrick stayed true to himself, and that too works much better than what this episode does. Well, anyway. Porous Pockets, of course, ends with SpongeBob having lost all of his money through his generous ways. And I guess generous is the right word to use here. He's generous with his money, but he's also an asshole in the episode. Both can be true. SpongeBob losing his money like this makes the message of the episode clear: you can't buy friendship, and that's a perfectly fine lesson for an episode about Mr. Krabs. But also, in this case, it's like the lesson almost feels unearned because of how boring and pointless the entirety of this episode has been. The very end of the episode is wholesome at least, and I do like that we see SpongeBob apologize, so thankfully, Porous Pockets ends on a good note. Bringing it all together now, I don't think that there's much more I can say about Porous Pockets. This episode is boring, out of character, and unremarkable. It also features shitty writing for SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship, which I do not appreciate. With some simple character switches, such as having Patrick or Mr. Krabs take SpongeBob's place, this episode could have been much better, perhaps even good. A switch with Mr. Krabs would have at least given me my father-son crumbs between Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob, or imagine if this episode was about the friendship between Squidward and Mr. Krabs or something. I'm a few seasons too early for an episode exploring a dynamic like that, though. But yeah, so anyway, I think it's clear that this episode belongs in my mediocre tier, where I'm giving it a 5.2 out of 10. Well, shit. Bloody fucking hell. Sorry, but somebody had to say it, because here I am with Choir Boys, also known as one of the most notorious episodes in the entire show. And I mean that. It's right up there, right below One Course Meal and A Pal for Gary. The reputation is that bad. Now, Choir Boys is one of those episodes that's infamous from an insider standpoint, as in infamous within the SpongeBob SquarePants fandom. Casual watchers of the show probably are only familiar with the notoriety of One Course Meal and A Pal for Gary. At least that's what I've gathered in my experience. But anyway, none of that is really relevant. So let me just, get started. Can't you see how utterly excited I am? Hey, at least Choir Boys starts out with a gorgeous background, like, you really can't go wrong there. And I like that the establishing shots for Squidward's house and then bathroom here, like, this little sign gag were, like, so great and very telling of his character. And take note, because these are going to be some of the last compliments I give this episode, because almost immediately we are subjected to what I consider to be the biggest problem of this episode. Can you guess what it is? Remember what I pointed out a few minutes ago in the review of Porous Pockets? If not, that's fine, I'll just tell you. My biggest issue with Choir Boys is that it is an unbelievable assault on our eardrums. I mean, really, who the fuck thought all the annoying singing and coughing and clearing of the throat was a great idea? I don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear that. No one wants to hear that. Unlike gross visuals and visceral slapstick where you can close your eyes, if you can hear well, you cannot escape annoying sounds unless you mute the episode. And I have never seen a SpongeBob episode with gross visuals throughout the entire thing. Not even the Splinter was this bad. Choir Boys is probably the most sensually unpleasant episode in the show, and obviously that is a huge turnoff. I'll return to this point throughout the review, but I thought it poignant to point it out first. So let's get my typical chronological run-through on the road. One thing I like in this episode is Squidward's outfit. It's cute and something different from what we see him typically wear, so that's a nice bit of visual appeal in an episode with zero audio appeal. Once Squidward leaves his house, we get a nice heaping helping of nothing funny happening. Yes, that's the second big problem of this episode, it's boring. This entire scene is built around SpongeBob being forlorn and blank and even depressed, and you can imagine how dull it is. Another problem here is that this episode uses that SpongeBob design that I hate from Boating Buddies, so I can't even enjoy the little visual appeal we do get from Squidward anymore. We are then treated to a very irritating coughing sound. Between the visual nonsense and the auditory atrocity, it's like Choir Boys wants to be the lowest ranked episode thus far. It's still got a ways to go if it wants to be anywhere near as frustrating and infuriating as The Thing, which is right now the lowest ranked episode of the show. But given I'm only like a minute and a half into this episode so far, it's certainly possible. So, SpongeBob starts following Squidward around because he wants Squidward to hear his singing, and Squidward is not interested in that whatsoever, and neither am I, if it means more annoying singing. For the most part, this is as boring as the rest of the episode, but I will say that I huffed out a little bit of a laugh when SpongeBob dug a giant pothole in the middle of the road, so hey, that's something positive for this episode. And also, I know that people don't like this scene, but I actually found the part with the jellyfish and Squidward to be funny, especially with SpongeBob's line about a captive audience, which again, I know people did not like, but I thought it was hilarious, because it's a very brief appearance of Troll Bob. Unfortunately, the entertainment quality of this part is dampened by SpongeBob's annoying singing, and for some reason this episode decided it wanted to be the Splinter, and so when Squidward gets stung, the visuals here are very unpleasant. Why this episode decided to assault both our eyes and our eardrums, I have no idea, but it's certainly making me dislike it. As you can see, I'm not having a very good time watching Choir Boys, and unfortunately this bad time only continues once SpongeBob stops Squidward once again, this time acting like a policeman. Let's examine our shitty qualities of this episode checklist here, shall we? Let's see. More bad singing? Check. More boring moments? Check. A general feeling of my time being wasted? Check. Wow, the only thing left unchecked is unpleasant visuals, and that's me being nice, since as I've told y'all, I don't like SpongeBob's design here. Though, to be fair, the mustache hides those ugly-ass cheeks, so it's all good. After this scene, we finally get to see some actually good singing from SpongeBob, which makes things actually somewhat interesting. Amazing how when you don't make things as irritating as possible, they're actually good. The way SpongeBob attracts jellyfish to him through his singing makes me think of Spongehenge. You can make of that what you will. If only I liked the face they drew on SpongeBob here. Can't win 'em all, I guess. Cutting back to Squidward, y'all will never believe what happens. Seriously, just guess. I bet you won't get it. If your answer was more unpleasant singing and coughing noises, then you would be correct. Isn't that just so surprising? Can y'all tell I'm reaching the end of my rope with this auditory torture yet? Because it's really starting to truly irritate me, maybe even piss me off. The same joke has been used for the entire episode, which on its own is a risky maneuver, but like, this joke ain't even funny and is actually actively unpleasant, so not a fan. That's why this audio bullshit is my main issue with this episode, because nearly all of the metaphorical funny cards are put into this one joke's basket, and that strategy completely fails, meaning that there are hardly any other good jokes to fall back on for humor. Another main problem of this episode is that it feels incomplete. Really, it feels empty. Almost like this episode is a short. And honestly, this episode should have been a short with this plot. I'm sure that this feeling of incompleteness that I have is connected to all the wasted time we get with the throat clearing and the bad singing and the very unnecessarily long scenes. Like, even though we see SpongeBob say that he wants to show that he can be in the men's choir, to me, I feel like we never actually get the feeling that he actually cares even a little bit about this. Perhaps it was just an excuse to spend time with Squidward, but that didn't come across. And so, seeing everyone cheer for him when he comes in with the heavenly singing that saves our ears does not feel all that satisfying and more like a thing that is happening. Though, I guess it is satisfying in that his heavenly singing saves our ears. The end of the episode was nice enough. I found it wholesome of SpongeBob to request a place for Squidward, and this is very nearly funnily shown in the ending with Squidward becoming a page turner. Ugh. That 3-letter word really just says it all about Choir Boys. Ugh. It's just so annoying and wastes so much time. And I think that this episode concept really could have gone somewhere, but everything beyond the concept needs to be scrapped for that to work, because the material we got is not it at all. I'm honestly struggling to figure out where to put this episode, because I don't like it. Oh no, definitely not. But I feel like it's not a dislike in the same way that I dislike The Thing, Like, that episode annoyed and infuriated me from a character action standpoint, while this one, it's more because of the execution. But I think that Choir Boys does deserve to go in the same tier as that episode at the very least, because this episode really just shows what you should not be doing when crafting an episode. You should not fill it with a bunch of annoying noises that fill up all your time. I would think that is common sense. But, well, and before I get to the actual rating, I would like to take a second to discuss the infamy of this episode. Choir Boys is one of those episodes known as a Squidward torture porn. Y'all know I don't fuck with that title or the ideas that underlie it. No need to retread there. As you can see, the treatment of Squidward is not what I take issue with in this episode. Not at all. Also, even by Squidward torture porn standards, this episode is rather tame. I don't feel anything at all for Squidward here, good or bad, as this episode just completely fails to engage me since it's so boring, other than making me irritated with the noises. And that is why I have decided that this episode is going to unseat The Thing as my lowest ranked episode so far. The Thing had a good first few minutes. This episode doesn't even have that. In fact, what this episode does have is what I like to call the ew factor, which is a quality I ascribe to episodes that have very few redeeming qualities, as well as a lot of unpleasantness and annoyingness. It is the opposite of the wow factor that decides whether an episode can be in my highest tier, the amazing tier. Do you see where I'm going with this? Yes, Choir Boys receives the dishonor of being my very first abysmal tier episode, where it comes in on the higher end with a score of 2.8 out of 10. Here I thought I'd be able to make it to season 7 before this tier came into play, but I just can't do it. This episode is really fucking bad. I wanted it to be good, I really did, so that I could bring some positivity to it, because I know it's so very hated, but I just couldn't. As always, I'll be ending this review with some closing thoughts of mine. Hoo boy, what a double whammy this review was! I mean, first I got an episode that really showcases some of my main problems with season 6 so far, boring and shitty writing, and then I got fucking Choir Boys being my lowest rated episode of the show so far. What I find funny about Choir Boys is that I think people do actually dislike it for similar reasons as me, but the main reason is that Squidward torture nonsense, even though the other issues are just so much more paramount to me. Like, I feel like the annoying noises are much less appealing than character treatment, but also, I mean, if this episode was about SpongeBob being mistreated, then I'd be truly enraged, so I guess I get it. I just wish that Squidward torture people had an actual leg to stand on, because complaining about Squidward torture is such a fruitless endeavor when Squidward has been, and will always be, the butt monkey of this show. Sorry to tell you. Like, what's the, quote-unquote line wherein normal butt monkey jokes become Squidward torture? This is why I don't like that concept, but I'll stop talking about it now. I've tread on this ground a million times by now. No, what I want to say is that I think it's obvious just who I was thinking of when I was reviewing this episode. That reviewer that we don't name around here. I've said before that I used to be a fan back in the day, and I remember the review of this episode pretty well. Those good old days of the mid-2010s of cartoon reviewing. I'm glad we're past them. Lately, I've been having to do a lot of analysis for TV shows, namely Arcane, so I feel like the kind of analysis I'm doing for that show is trickling down into my reviews, or at least it did for this one. See, when I've got the time, I feel like my reviews of this show can be so high quality. Like, look at me, deeply analyzing Porous Pockets of all episodes. I think that's one of the things that make my reviews stand out, other than the tangents, but perhaps that's just me. I just really like making these videos, and I felt like talking about that today. Alright, well, these closing thoughts are pretty long now, so I think I'll go ahead and close things out here, and I'll see y'all in the next review.